Isang umaga, ipinatawag ni Kuya ang mga housemates sa living room.
Good morning, housemates.
Hello po, Kuya! Good morning!
Good morning po, Kuya.
Yes po, Kuya. Good morning po.
Good morning po, Kuya.
Good morning po, Kuya.
Good morning po, Kuya.
Housemates, para sa inyong midterm task, gagawa kayo ng comprehensive discussion addressed to the people on the outside world, especially the aspiring accountants and auditors, about the important things to know and remember about audit planning. You're given 24 hours to prepare, and the live presentation will be held on September 26. This is in coherence with the 7th Annual Auditor Proud Day. Good luck, housemates! Be brother!
Welcome to PBB Season 402. Today is a celebration of the 7th Annual Auditor Proud Day, and we have come to talk about audit planning. So please allow me to present to you my fellow housemates.
Good morning, this is Kriza, and I am tasked to discuss the definition, objective, and importance of audit planning. To begin with, let us first define what is audit planning. Audit planning involves developing a general audit strategy and a detailed approach for the expected conduct of the audit. It is very important for the auditor to plan the audit work so that the audit will be performed in an effective and efficient manner. For the objective, the auditor's main objective in planning the audit is to determine the scope of the audit procedures that will be undertaken. The extent of planning will vary according to the size of the entity, the complexity of the audit, the auditor's experience with the entity, and the knowledge of the business. The SA 315 requires the auditor to obtain a sufficient understanding of the entity and its environment, including its internal control. Such understanding involves obtaining knowledge about the entity's objectives and strategies, and the entity's related business risks that may result in material misstatement on the financial statements, and many more. Lastly, why is adequate planning of the audit work important? Well, it is because planning helps ensure that appropriate attention is devoted to important areas of the audit. It also helps identify potential problems and allows the work to be completed expeditiously. So, adequate planning assists in the proper assignment and coordination of work and helps ensure that the audit is conducted effectively and efficiently. So, I hope you learned something. Mark?
Hi, this is Mark Louis. After knowing the gist and significance of audit planning, let us now talk about the stages or the things you first need to consider prior to the actual planning itself. A good audit master plan requires the understanding of the client, understanding of internal controls, and the development of an overall audit strategy. When we talk about understanding the client, it basically means that the auditor should have sufficient information or data of the client's business and industry. There is a need to gather information first, mainly for the purpose of identifying and understanding the events, transactions, and practices that may have a significant effect on the financial statements. The better the auditor understands the client's operations, the more efficient and effective the examination is likely to be, which would then result in having greater value to the clients of the auditor's services. There are a lot of ways to obtain knowledge or information about business and industry. Some of the sources include the review of prior year's working papers, tour of the client's facilities, reading corporate documents and reports, and discussion with people internally or externally. This obtained information will be then used as a frame of reference within which the auditor exercises professional judgment. It will assist the auditor, especially in assessing the risks and identifying potential problems, and evaluating the reasonableness of the client's estimate. It is a continuous and cumulative process meaning the auditor should re-evaluate the previous information and to update it if needed depending on how it will affect the financial statements and whether the assertions are consistent with the auditor's knowledge of the entity. Another important step of having good audit planning is to understand the entity's internal control systems. The main reason the auditor is required to understand internal controls is mainly to anticipate the type of probable misstatements that may arise in the financial statements, allowing the auditor to prepare the proper audit procedures. It will be thoroughly discussed in the next chapter or in the next reporter. And lastly, when the auditor has gained sufficient understanding of the entity and its environment including the internal controls, the auditor should now formulate an overall audit strategy. Now, there are many approaches when it comes to having a strategy. However, the best audit strategy is the approach in which both efficiency and effectiveness are present, and that is having an effective audit performed at the least possible cost. I think that would be all. Thank you for listening.
Hello everyone, this is Lara. At this point in time, let us be acquainted with the concept of materiality. As defined in accounting literature, information is material if its omission or misstatement could influence the economic decisions of users taken on the basis of the financial statement. It is not a true-to-all concept. It is just a matter of professional judgment. What's material for you may not be material for others. When designing an audit plan, the auditors are required to make a preliminary estimate of materiality for use during the examination. It can either be the largest amount of misstatements that an auditor could tolerate in the FS, or the smallest aggregate amount that can misstate any part of the FS. It is for this reason that this estimate will assist them in determining the amount of evidence needed to support their opinion. As the materiality level decreases, more evidence is needed. Now let us talk about what really is the essence of materiality in audit. In the planning stage, materiality is used to determine the scope of audit procedures. As mentioned earlier, the higher the materiality, the more extensive the required procedure would be. Meanwhile, in the completion stage, materiality is used to evaluate the effect of misstatements in the FS. We answer this question: how impactful is our treatment of materiality in correspondence to the overage or shortage in the FS? Well, we've been talking about materiality levels since before. What and how exactly can we identify materiality levels? Join me in exploring these steps. First, we have to determine the overall materiality in the FS level. It is important to remember that FS are interrelated. A misstatement in one affects the other. That is why auditors consider materiality at the smallest aggregate level of tolerable misstatements, such that if the balance sheet considers 100,000 as material, while the income statement considers 200,000 as material, then the auditor will recognize 100,000 as the overall materiality level, so that the FS will not be misstated by more than this amount. Second is to determine the tolerable misstatement in the account balance level. This is done by allocating the overall materiality to the FS account balances. This then allows the auditors to design the appropriate audit procedures that will be applied to specific accounts. The last but definitely not the least step is to compare the aggregate amount of uncorrected misstatement with the overall materiality. This is to determine whether or not the financial statements are materially misstated. All of these steps remind us of one accounting principle. Can you recall? Yeah, it's prudence. By using a lower level of materiality during the audit, the extent of audit procedures is heightened, thereby reducing the risk of uncorrected and undetected misstatements. Did you know that we have a term for this reduced level of materiality? Well, we call this as performance materiality. Thank you so much for lending your ears. I hope you learned something. Charmaine?
Good morning, this is Charlie. Today, I will be tackling audit risk, inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. First is audit risk. It is defined as the risk that the auditor may provide an incorrect audit opinion when the financial statements are materially misstated. As a result, audit risk is divided into two components, which are material misstatement risk and detection risk. Second is inherent risk. It is defined as a susceptibility of a statement regarding a type of transaction, account balance, or disclosure to a material misstatement, either individually or when combined with other misstatements, before taking into account any relevant controls. Third, control risk is the risk that a material misstatement in a claim regarding the class of transaction, account balance, or disclosure will not be prevented, identified, and resolved on a timely basis by the entity's internal control. Lastly, detection risk is defined as the risk that the processes used by the auditor to minimize audit risk to an acceptable level would fail to detect an existing and potentially substantial mistake, either individually or when aggregated with other misstatements. Lovely!
Good day, this is Lovely. There are 5 steps in using the audit risk model. Step 1. Set the acceptable level of audit risk. The auditor should plan the audit in such a way that after performing audit procedures, an opinion can be issued in the financial statements at low levels. Step 2. Assess the level of inherent risk. When assessing risk, the auditor must consider specific factors related to the client that may affect the risk of a material misstatement for a particular account. Step 3. Assess the level of control risk. Assessment of control risk would involve studying and evaluating the effectiveness of the client's internal control systems. Step 4. Determine the acceptable level of detection risk. The acceptable level of detection risk can be determined as acceptable level of detection risk equals to acceptable level of audit risk over the product of inherent and control risk. Step 5. Design substantive test. In this step, the auditor will have to modify the nature, timing, and extent of the substantive test to achieve a high level of assurance. Now, let's relate inherent, control, and detection risk to the overall audit risk. An increase or decrease in any of these components would cause a corresponding increase or decrease in the overall audit risk. Also, let's talk about relationship between materiality and risk. There is an inverse relationship between materiality and the level of the audit risk. That is, the higher the materiality level, the lower the audit risk and vice versa. And the auditor will compensate for this by either reducing the assessed level of control risk or reducing the detection risk. Monica?
Today, I'll be discussing the risk assessment procedures and the analytical procedures. Risk assessment procedures are performed to understand the entity and its environment and assess the risk of material misstatements procedures. PSA requires the auditor to use analytical procedures in an audit's planning and overall review stages. There are steps in applying analytical procedures. The first step is to develop expectation regarding financial statements using the PAINT. P is the prior year's financial statements, A is the anticipated results such as budget, I is the industry average of the other entities operating within the same industry, N is the non-financial information relevant to the financial statement, and T is the typical relationship among financial statement account balances. The second step is to compare the expectations with the financial statements under audit, and the last step is to investigate significant unexpected differences to determine whether financial statements contain material misstatements. Before I proceed to use analytical procedures in an audit, let us first know the stages of the audit and its objectives. So there are 3 stages: the planning the audit, the substantive test, and the overall review. Planning the audit is to understand the client's business. The substantive tests are obtain evidence to confirm account balances. The overall review confirms conclusions reached for the fairness of the financial statements. So using analytical procedures in planning is to compare financial statements with expectations. Also to determine the differences between the expected and the recorded balances. So if you think the difference is significant, so design more extensive substantive tests, and if not, design less extensive substantive tests. And that would be all. Thank you for listening.
Hey there, this is Hazelyn. For the last part of our topic, in order to finalize the planning process, documentation of the audit plan is needed by preparing an overall audit plan, audit program, and time budget.
First is an overall audit plan. It is an overview of the expected scope and conduct that sets out in bold terms the nature, timing, and the extent of the audit procedures that need to be performed. As an audit plan varies for each client, it should always be in detail in order to guide in the development of the audit program. The next one would be an audit program. It executes the audit strategy. It sets out a detailed in the audit procedures that serves as an instructions to assistants involved in the audit. And it also means as a control and to record the proper execution of the work. It should always include a detailed list that an auditor believes that are necessary to accomplish the audit objectives. Lastly would be the time budget. It is an estimate of the time that will be spent in executing the audit procedures, and this provides as a basis of estimating audit fees and to help or assist the auditor in assessing the efficiency of the assistance. And to end this topic in audit planning, we should remember that planning is continuous throughout the engagement. The overall audit plan and audit program should be revised as necessary during the course of the audit, and the reasons for the significant changes should be recorded. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening.
Matagumpayan kaya ng mga housemates ang kanilang midterm test? To vote, text PAST to 2366 kung nagustuhan niyo ang kanilang presentasyon.
Good evening, housemates. Ang resulta ng botohan. Kayo ay nakakuha ng 3,145 votes. Congratulations, housemates! Kayo ang nagwagi!
OMG! Salamat po kuya! God bless po!
Thank you po, Big Brother!
Yay! Thank you so much, Kuya! Congrats, guys! Congrats natin!
Maraming salamat po, Kuya.
Yay! Salamat po, Kuya!
Yay! Thank you, Kuya!
Pinoy Big Brother Season 402 would like to thank the following: